Looking back, I really should have seen this coming. When you're the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council, you expect certain questions about Earth. The usual stuff: our level of technological development, our political systems, our various cultures and customs. What I didn't expect was to spend 3 full rotation cycles explaining why we let apex predators just exist in our public parks. The whole thing started during my first official presentation to the Council. There I was, standing on the floating platform in the Grand Chamber, surrounded by representatives from 200 different species. The chamber itself was impressive enough, a massive dome of some kind of living crystal that shifted colors based on the emotional resonance of the beings inside. At that particular moment, it was cycling through various shades of blue, which my translator helpfully informed me indicated polite attention with undertones of skepticism. I had just finished my standard introduction about Earth being a Class 3 developing world seeking peaceful integration into the galactic community, when Counselor Vex-Tin, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a quantum computer, raised one of their sensory appendages. Ambassador Fletcher. They began, their translator rendering their clicks and whistles into crisp English. Our preliminary surveys of your world indicate a significant discrepancy in classification. Your planet appears to host multiple species of large predatory mammals in close proximity to your population centers. Our data suggests these creatures, particularly the ones you call bears, regularly interact with your species. Yet you've classified Earth as merely Class 3 on the planetary danger scale. I nodded, not quite understanding the issue. That's correct, Counselor. Bears are pretty common in many of our wilderness areas. We've got good protocols in place for managing human-bear interactions. The crystal dome suddenly flashed bright yellow universal surprise. Managing interactions. This came from Counselor Zeph, a floating cloud of sentient plasma contained in an environmental suit. You mean you allow these encounters to occur? Deliberately. Well, yeah, I said, pulling up some tourist photos from Yellowstone National Park on my datapad. See? We've got dedicated parks where people can observe bears in their natural habitat. We do recommend staying at least 100 yards away, of course. The dome shifted to a deep purple horror. I watched as 2 of the junior scientific advisors, Zix and Cree, frantically consulted their own devices. Zix, who resembled nothing so much as a very serious blue octopus wearing a lab coat, raised all 8 tentacles in alarm. Ambassador, according to our scans, these bears possess sufficient physical capabilities to terminate human life in approximately 2.3 seconds. They can run at speeds exceeding your fastest ground vehicles, possess natural weapons that can penetrate most conventional materials, and have sensory capabilities far beyond human baseline. And you recommend staying 100 yards away. Well, yeah, I repeated, starting to realize this might be a bigger deal than I'd anticipated. I mean, that's just a general guideline. Sometimes you end up closer by accident. That's why we have bear spray. The entire chamber went dead silent. Even the crystal dome seemed to hold its breath, settling into a flat gray of pure disbelief. You? Spray them? With a chemical irritant, Cree, a tall insectoid with particularly expressive antennae, seemed to be having trouble processing this information. And this is sufficient to deter a creature capable of. They consulted their notes, crushing a steel drum like it was made of tissue paper. Most of the time, yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to get creative. I remember this one time when I was camping in Montana. Ambassador Fletcher, Counselor Vex-Tin interrupted, their voice carrying a new note of what I could only describe as respectful terror. I believe we need to reassess several of our preliminary assumptions about human civilization. Would you be willing to provide a more detailed briefing on these bear management protocols? I looked around the chamber at 200 faces displaying various alien approximations of stunned disbelief. The dome had settled into a swirling mixture of purple horror and yellow surprise, with occasional flashes of green respect. Sure, I said, fighting back a grin. But first, let me tell you about the time my cousin Dave had to punch a black bear in the nose because it tried to steal his cooler. The thing about trying to explain bears to a group of aliens is that you quickly realize just how weird Earth really is. I stood there in the grand chamber, now tasked with giving what had to be the galaxy's first comprehensive presentation on Ursine biology and behavior to an increasingly horrified audience. So, to summarize, I said, pulling up another diagram, the average adult grizzly bear can run at speeds up to 35 miles per hour, has the bite force of roughly 1,200 pounds per square inch, and can flip a car if they're feeling particularly motivated. Zix, who had moved closer to the front of the chamber, was recording everything with 3 different devices while simultaneously taking notes with their remaining tentacles, and the survival rate for encounters with these creatures. Oh, pretty good actually. Most bears want nothing to do with humans if they can help it. In fact, if you make enough noise while hiking, they'll usually clear out before you even see them. Noisecree's antennae were twitching so rapidly they had become a blur. You mean you intentionally announce your presence to these apex predators? Well, yeah, better to let them know you're coming than to surprise them. Nobody likes a surprise bear, I paused, considering. Though there was this one time at Glacier National Park where we were singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, and this huge grizzly just sat down on the trail ahead of us and looked like he was listening. The dome flashed through several colors I hadn't seen before, settling on a peculiar shade of mauve that my translator simply rendered as. Counselor Vex 10 raised their appendage again. Ambassador, perhaps you could clarify something for us. In the story you just shared about your cousin Dave, you mentioned he struck the bear, with his bear manipulating appendage. His fist? Yeah, right in the nose. Though that's really only recommended for black bears, not grizzlies. With grizzlies you're supposed to play dead. Unless they start eating you, then you fight back. The entire chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated exclamations. The dome strobed through colors so quickly it looked like a disco ball at a rave. I waited patiently while the council members collected themselves. Ambassador Fletcher Counselor Zeph's plasma form was pulsing rapidly. Are you suggesting that your species has developed a detailed protocol for what to do while being actively consumed by a mega predator? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds weird, I scratched my head. But yeah, basically. Though honestly, your bigger problem is usually keeping tourists from trying to take selfies with them. We actually have to put up signs telling people not to attempt to ride the bears. At this point, Zix dropped one of their recording devices. Cree had gone completely still, their antennae pressed flat against their head in what I was learning to recognize as the insectoid equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare. Your species, Zix said slowly, all 8 eyes fixed on me, requires official signage to prevent them from attempting to mount and ride apex predators. Oh, that's nothing. Wait until I tell you about the guy who tried to get a close-up photo of a grizzly by covering himself in bacon grease. No, the entire council shouted in unison, the dome flashing bright red. Fair enough, I said, making a mental note to save that story for later. Maybe we should move on to bear spray basics? It's actually a pretty fascinating adaptation of capsaicin-based. Ambassador. Counselor Vex 10 interrupted, their voice carrying a new note of urgency. I believe it would be beneficial for our scientific team to conduct a first-hand observation of these human-bear interaction protocols. Would you be willing to escort researchers Zix and Cree on a field study? I looked at the 2 scientists. Cree had finally unfrozen and was now vibrating slightly. Zix had managed to retrieve their dropped recorder and was clutching it like a security blanket. Sure, I said, already imagining how they'd react to their first bear jam on the highway. I know just the place. Have either of you ever heard of Yellowstone? The dome shifted to that undefined mauve color again, and I swear I heard it make a whimpering sound. You haven't truly experienced bureaucratic efficiency until you've seen the Galactic Council mobilize for a scientific expedition they're completely terrified of. Within 1 rotation cycle, we had approval for Zix and Cree to visit Earth, along with enough safety equipment to survive a small nuclear war. I still don't understand why we can't observe from orbit, Cree complained as we stepped out of the shuttle at West Yellowstone. They were wearing what looked like a battle mech designed by someone whose only reference for Earth was a child's coloring book or long-range scanners. Would completely miss the point, I interrupted, trying not to laugh at the way Zix was attempting to carry 17 different scanning devices with only 8 tentacles. You can't understand bear country until you're actually in bear country. Bear country. Zix's voice rose an octave. You designate entire geographical regions according to the presence of these predators. Well, yeah. How else would people know where to go camping? The sound Cree made couldn't be translated, but their mech suit took a nervous step backward. Now, I said, pulling out a map, I've arranged for us to stay at the Old Faithful Lodge. It's right in the heart of the park, perfect for observing both bears and human interactions with them. But first, we need to go through the safety briefing. Yes, safety protocols. Zix brightened considerably, pulling out a fresh data pad. Please detail all defensive measures and escape procedures. Okay, first, make noise while hiking. Sing, talk, clap, whatever. Second, keep your food secured in bear-proof containers. Third, carry bear spray and know how to use it. And most importantly, I paused for emphasis, don't try to take selfies with the bears. There was a long moment of silence. That's it. Cree's antennae were doing the twitchy thing again. Those are the complete safety protocols for coexisting with a mega predator capable of, they checked their notes, removing a being's head with a single bite. Well, there's also stay 100 yards away, but that's more of a suggestion than a rule, depending on the situation. A suggestion. Zix had gone a pale shade of blue that I hadn't seen before. Ambassador Fletcher, are you implying that humans routinely violate even these minimal safety parameters? Right on cue. A convoy of minivans and RVs went racing past us toward the park entrance, someone yelling bear jam out of a window. And there's our first bear sighting of the day, I said cheerfully. Shall we? What? What is a bear jam? Cree asked, their mech suit whirring anxiously. Oh, that's when everyone stops their cars in the middle of the road to look at a bear. Creates a traffic jam, hence bear jam. Come on, we don't want to miss it. I started walking toward my park-issued SUV, then turned back when I realized they weren't following. Both aliens were standing completely still, their respective translation devices making sounds that suggested they were having trouble processing what I'd just said. Let me understand this correctly, Zix said finally, all 8 eyes blinking in sequence. When your species encounters one of these apex predators, your standard response is to create a traffic obstruction in order to observe it more closely. Pretty much. Though sometimes people get a bit too excited and try to feed them through their car windows. That's why we have the Rangers. The Rangers? Cree asked weakly. Yeah, they're the folks in charge of making sure both the bears and the humans behave themselves. They've got a pretty good success rate, all things considered. Though there was this one time when a bear figured out how to open car doors. Ambassador Zix interrupted, their tentacles curling protectively around their scanning equipment. Perhaps we should proceed to this bear jam before the observation opportunity is lost. Now you're getting into the spirit, I said, heading for the car again. Just wait until you see how close people get for their photos. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll see someone try to use a selfie stick. Behind me, I heard Cree's mech suit make a sound that I'm pretty sure was it trying to call the shuttle back. The dome on their emergency communicator was cycling through colors I hadn't seen since that time I mentioned we let bears fish in the same rivers where we go swimming. The bear jam turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. About 30 cars haphazardly parked along the road, dozens of tourists hanging out of windows with cameras, and one very confused grizzly bear wondering why everyone was so interested in watching it dig for grubs. Fascinating, Zix mumbled. All 8 tentacles operating different scanning devices. The humans appear to be displaying no fear response whatsoever, despite being well within the creature's attack range. Oh, they think they're safe because they're in cars, I explained, watching a minivan inch closer to the bear, which would be true if bears couldn't flip them over. But hey, that hardly ever happens. Cree's mech suit made a sound like a distressed tea kettle. Ambassador, they said carefully, You keep using phrases like hardly ever and almost never when discussing fatal scenarios. This is not as reassuring as you seem to think it is. I was about to respond when a park ranger's vehicle pulled up. Ranger Jenny stepped out, looking exactly as done with everything as most rangers do by mid-tourist season. "Folks," she called out, somehow making that single word sound like both a greeting and a threat, "let's remember to give the bear some space." "Yes, sir, I'm talking to you with the selfie stick." "No, sir, getting closer won't improve your shot." "Yes, sir, I can and will write you a ticket." "Remarkable," Zix whispered, focusing 3 scanners on the ranger. "This human appears to be enforcing safety protocols through nothing more than verbal warnings and the threat of documentary penalties." "The really remarkable thing," I whispered back, "is that it usually works." We spent another hour observing the bear jam before the Grizzly wandered off into the woods, looking slightly annoyed at having its breakfast interrupted by the paparazzi. I suggested we head deeper into the park for some proper hiking. That's when things got interesting. We were about halfway up a trail near Old Faithful when Zix's primary scanner started making an odd beeping noise. They tapped it with a tentacle, looking confused. "This can't be right," they muttered. "The device is indicating a large biological mass approaching from." They looked up. "Oh!" There, about 50 yards ahead of us on the trail, stood a female grizzly, and behind her, tumbling over each other like furry bowling balls, were 2 cubs. Kree's mech suit actually took a step backward on its own. "Ambassador," they said in a very small voice, "my research indicates that female ursines with offspring are particularly aggressive. Should we not be implementing emergency evacuation procedures?" "Nah," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "We just need to back away slowly. No sudden movements. As long as we don't do anything stupid, we'll be fine." That's when Zix's scanner chose the perfect moment to malfunction, emitting a high-pitched squeal that made the mother bear's head snap up. "Okay," I said, still calm. "Now might be a good time to remember what I said about bear spray." The chemical deterrent Zix was trying to shut down their scanner while simultaneously attempting to hide behind all their other equipment. "The one you said was only mostly effective." "That's the one. Everyone remember where they put their cans." The mother bear took a step forward, making a noise that suggested she wasn't thrilled about our choice of hiking trail. Kree's mech suit started what I can only describe as a panic dance. "Ambassador, my research did not prepare me for this scenario. The statistical probability of survival in a close encounter with a maternal ursine is..." "Hey there, Mama Bear," I called out, keeping my voice friendly but firm while slowly reaching for my bear spray. "We're just passing through. No need to worry about us. Look at all the nice berries over there, way more interesting than we are." The bear stood up on her hind legs, and I heard what sounded like Zix trying to send a last will and testament through their emergency communicator. What happened next would apparently become the stuff of legend in the Galactic Council's scientific community. But that's a story for the next part of this report. So there we were, 1 calm human, 2 panicking alien researchers, and 1 very unimpressed mama grizzly bear doing her best impression of a furry skyscraper. Behind her, the cubs had stopped playing and were watching us with the kind of casual interest that bear cubs reserve for potential entertainment. I had my bear spray ready. Zix was still frantically trying to shut down their malfunctioning scanner, and Kree's mech suit had begun playing what their translator identified as traditional end-of-existence hymns. That's when we heard it. The sound that makes every park ranger, experienced hiker, and sane person cringe. "Oh my God, this is going to get so many likes." All of us, including the bear, turned to look at the source of the voice. A tourist who had somehow managed to sneak up behind us while wearing neon yellow Crocs and a shirt that read YOLO was holding up their phone and walking toward the bear. "Sir," I said, trying to keep one eye on Mama Bear and one on this walking Darwin Award candidate, "I'm going to need you to slowly back away." "No way, dude. This is totally going to go viral. Hey bear, look over here. Do something cute." I heard Zix make a sound that their translator couldn't even begin to process. Kree's mech suit had simply frozen, probably from some kind of logic failure. The mother bear dropped back to all fours, which might seem less threatening but actually means they can now charge at full speed. The cubs, sensing upcoming entertainment, sat down to watch. "Sir, I tried again. I'm going to count to 3, and you're going to slowly move behind me. 1. Almost got it. Hey, bear cubs, do a backflip or something. 2. The bear took a step forward, letting out a low growl that you could feel in your bones. This is going to be epic. Maybe if I... 3. Several things happened at once. The tourist took another step forward, pulling out a selfie stick. The mother bear, apparently deciding that this particular human was too stupid to live, started to charge. And I grabbed the tourist by their YOLO shirt, yanked them backward, and deployed the bear spray in a perfect arc just as Ranger Jenny came running up the trail, shouting what I'm pretty sure were some very creative curses. The bear spray did its job. Mama bear pulled up short, shaking her head and sneezing. The cubs, apparently deciding that this wasn't the show they'd been hoping for, went back to playing with a fallen log and our tourist friend. "Well?" "My phone," they wailed, staring at where it had landed in a patch of mud. "I almost had the perfect shot. Do you know how many followers I could have gotten?" "Sir," Ranger Jenny said, in that special tone that rangers reserve for people they'd like to feed to the bears, "we need to have a discussion about park rules and federal regulations." I turned to check on our alien researchers. Zix had finally gotten their scanner turned off and was now recording the entire scene with 3 different backup devices. Kree's mech suit had rebooted and was producing a series of readings that they would later tell me broke several of their scientific instruments. Ambassador Fletcher Zix said faintly, "All 8 eyes wide, did you just casually deploy a chemical deterrent against a charging apex predator while simultaneously preventing a member of your own species from achieving their desired recording?" "Pretty much," I said, watching as Ranger Jenny wrote what had to be the most satisfying ticket of her career. Just another Tuesday in Yellowstone, really. Another Tuesday. Kree's antennae were moving in patterns that suggested they were having trouble processing this concept. "You mean to tell us this is a regular occurrence?" "Oh, sure. Though usually they're trying to get the bears to pose with their kids for family photos. That's why we had to put up the signs about not using children as bait." The sound that came from both aliens simultaneously was probably the closest thing to a universal expression of what that I've ever heard. "Perhaps," Zix said weakly, "we should return to the lodge and prepare our preliminary report for the council." "Good idea," I agreed. "Besides, it's almost dinner time and we need to make sure all the food is properly secured. You would not believe how good bears are at breaking into cars when they smell pizza." Kree's mech suit made a whimpering noise and started backing down the trail. Behind us, I could still hear the tourist trying to argue with Ranger Jenny about their constitutional right to bear selfies. I had a feeling the council was going to have some interesting questions about this in our next session. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. The crystal dome overhead had settled into a sort of stunned gray color as Zix and Kree presented their findings from the Yellowstone expedition. I stood off to the side, trying not to grin as they showed the holographic recordings of our adventures. "As you can see," Zix said, all 8 tentacles gesturing at the floating images, "human behavior around these apex predators defies all known xenobiological survival protocols. They not only coexist with these creatures but actively seek them out for." They consulted their notes. "Entertainment purposes and documentation purposes," Kree added, their antennae still slightly bent from their mech suits' panic dance. "They appear to value capturing images of these encounters more than their own continued existence." The council members watched in horror as the recording showed highlights from various bear jams, featuring tourists hanging out of car windows, attempting to offer bears sandwiches. And one particularly memorable moment where someone tried to convince their teenager to get closer to a bear for better lighting. Ambassador Fletcher Counselor Vex Tin said finally, their voice carrying a new note of what sounded almost like awe. "How does your species maintain population growth with such interesting survival instincts?" "Oh, bear incidents are actually pretty rare," I explained. Most bears want nothing to do with humans. Now, if you want to talk about dangerous animals, let me tell you about the time my sister went scuba diving with great white sharks. No, the entire council shouted in unison, the dome flashing warning red. Perhaps Councillor Zeph suggested, their plasma form pulsing rapidly, we should focus on the immediate matter at hand. Based on these findings, I move that we immediately reclassify Earth from a Class 3 to a Class 7 death world. Seconded called out several council members. Not because of the bears, Zeph continued, but because any species that looks at a 2,000-pound apex predator and thinks I wonder if it wants part of my sandwich is clearly operating on a level of reality we cannot comprehend. The most disturbing part, Zix added, pulling up another hologram, is their warning signage. Observer, please note this particular sign which reads, "Please do not attempt to ride the bears." The fact that such a warning is necessary suggests. We get the point, Councillor Vextin interrupted hastily. All in favor of reclassification. The vote was unanimous. Earth was officially upgraded to Class 7, making us the only known civilization to achieve space flight while still actively coexisting with multiple species that regularly tried to eat us. Ambassador Fletcher, Councillor Vextin said, their appendages twitching slightly. In light of these revelations, the Council would like to offer you a new position as Chief Xenobiological Relations Officer. We believe your unique perspective on interspecies interactions could be valuable. Sure, I said, already imagining their reactions to learning about Australia. I'd be happy to help. Though I should probably mention that bears aren't even our most interesting wildlife. Wait until you hear about honey badgers. The dome made a sound like a squeak and briefly turned plaid, a color I hadn't even known it could produce. And that's how humanity earned its reputation as the crazy species that treats apex predators like oversized raccoons. Though I have to say, the Council's reaction to learning about our habit of keeping smaller versions of apex predators as pets was even better. But that's another story. Just wait until they find out about skydiving.